My wife's childhood friend told me their connection was deeper than marriage, and I'd never compare. So I let him listen to her 911 call about him watching her through our windows. Caleb cornered me at our anniversary dinner while Elena was in the bathroom. We'd rented out a private room at the Italian place where I'd proposed 4 years ago, invited 20 friends and family, and I was riding the high of a perfect evening until he leaned across the table with that serious expression. "We need to talk man to man," he said, his voice dropping to something almost confidential. I thought he wanted to discuss splitting the bill or maybe planning Elena's surprise birthday trip. Instead, he said, "You need to understand something about Elena and me. Our connection goes deeper than marriage." I laughed because I thought he was joking, making some weird best friend joke I didn't get, but his face stayed deadly serious. "I'm not kidding. We've known each other our whole lives. You're her husband legally, sure, but I'm her person. I'm the one who really knows her." I stopped laughing. Caleb had been Elena's childhood friend since they were 7, grew up 3 houses apart, went through school together. He was at our wedding, gave a heartfelt speech about how Elena deserved someone who'd treat her right, seemed genuinely happy for us. He'd been around constantly over the past 4 years, Sunday dinners, game nights, random coffee meetups with Elena. I'd never questioned it because Elena said he was like a brother. But sitting there listening to him talk about their connection transcending my marriage, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What Elena and I share goes beyond what you two have," Caleb continued, his eyes intense. "You're part of her present, but I'm part of her foundation. Every important memory she has, I'm in it. Her first day of school, her dad's funeral, every heartbreak before you. When she thinks about her life, her real life, I'm there. Where are you?" Elena came back from the bathroom and immediately sensed the tension. "Everything okay?" she asked, looking between us. Caleb smiled warmly and raised his glass. "Just telling your husband how lucky he is to have you." Elena relaxed and squeezed my shoulder. The rest of the dinner felt wrong, like I was watching my own life through a filter. Caleb kept making these little comments that everyone else heard as friendly, but I heard differently. "Elena and I have been through everything together. Some bonds you just can't explain to people who weren't there. We have our own language, don't we, Elle?" And Elena would laugh or nod, not seeming to notice how possessive it sounded. When we got home that night, I asked her what Caleb meant by their connection going deeper than marriage. Elena's face changed instantly. "He said that to you?" Her voice went quiet in a way that scared me. "What exactly did he say?" I repeated the conversation word for word and watched Elena's hands start shaking. She sat down on our bed and stared at the floor for a long moment. "Caleb's been getting weird lately," she admitted. "I didn't want to worry you because I kept thinking he'd snap out of it, but he's been showing up at my work without calling first, texting me at odd hours, getting upset if I don't respond immediately." She pulled out her phone and showed me messages from Caleb, dozens of them. "Good morning, thinking about you. Remember that time we went to the lake when we were 12? You looked beautiful today in that blue dress. I can tell when something's bothering you even from far away." The messages went back months, sent at all hours, some at 2 or 3 a.m. Elena scrolled through them, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "He started talking about our cosmic connection a few months ago, how we were meant to be in each other's lives forever. I thought he was just being nostalgic about our childhood." I asked why she hadn't told me. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Because 3 weeks ago something happened that scared me and I didn't know how to tell you." She took a shaky breath. "I woke up at 2 a.m. and saw someone standing in our backyard. Just standing there, looking up at our bedroom window. I could see the silhouette against the fence light. I was terrified. I called 911 while you were sleeping. I stared at her, feeling my world tilt. "You called the police? Elena, why didn't you wake me up?" She was crying now. "Because when the police came and searched the yard, they found Caleb hiding in the bushes behind the shed. He had binoculars. He'd been watching our bedroom window." The words hit me like physical blows. Elena continued through her tears. "He told the police he was checking on me because he had a bad feeling I was in danger. He said our connection lets him sense when I need him." I felt rage building in my chest, hot and immediate. "Elena, he was stalking you through our bedroom window. And you didn't tell me?" She grabbed my hands. I was scared and confused. "This is Caleb. He was at my 7th birthday party. He held my hand at my dad's funeral. I couldn't process that he'd do something like that. The police said they'd talk to him and warn him to stay away from our property. I thought that would be the end of it." I asked if she'd pressed charges. Elena shook her head. "The police said we could, but Caleb seemed so confused and apologetic. He kept saying he was sorry, that he'd just been worried about me, that his intentions were completely pure. I felt bad for him. I thought maybe he was having some kind of breakdown. I couldn't believe what I was hearing." "He was watching you sleep through our window with binoculars and you felt bad for him?" Elena pulled away from me. "You don't understand. We've been friends for 25 years. That's longer than I've known you. I couldn't just immediately think of him as some predator." I asked to hear the 911 call. Elena hesitated, then pulled it up on her phone where she'd saved the recording. I listened to my wife's terrified voice telling the dispatcher there was someone in our backyard watching our house, that she could see him standing there, that she was scared to turn on the lights in case it provoked him. When the dispatcher asked if she had any idea who it might be, there was a long pause before Elena whispered, "I think it might be my childhood friend Caleb. He's been acting strange lately." The dispatcher asked follow-up questions about Caleb's behavior, and Elena described months of escalating contact, the constant texts, the unannounced visits, the way he'd talk about their special bond. Hearing it all laid out like that, in Elena's shaking voice at 2 a.m., made me realize how bad this had gotten while I'd been completely oblivious. The recording ended with police saying they'd found someone and asking Elena to come to the door. I looked at my wife and saw fear in her eyes that had nothing to do with me. "He's not well," Elena said quietly. "Something in him broke after his divorce last year. He started fixating on our childhood, talking about how those were the happiest times of his life, how he felt most understood by me. I tried to set boundaries, but he'd get this hurt look and say I was abandoning him when he needed me most." I asked what boundaries she'd tried to set. Elena listed them, asking him to text less, to call before visiting, to stop talking about their connection in such intense terms. Every time I'd set a boundary, he'd respect it for maybe a week, then slowly push back into the same patterns. He'd say things like, "I can't help how I feel," or "You're the only person who really gets me." It made me feel guilty for having normal expectations of appropriate friendship. I realized Elena had been dealing with this alone for months, trying to manage Caleb's escalating obsession without alarming me or hurting someone she'd known her entire life. The next morning, I called the police and asked about the incident from 3 weeks ago. The officer who'd responded remembered it clearly. The guy claimed he was protecting his friend, but everything about the situation was wrong. He'd been there for at least an hour based on his position and the way he'd settled in. He had binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens. When we searched him, we found dozens of photos on the camera, photos of your house from different angles, different times of day, photos of your wife leaving for work, coming home, getting the mail. We strongly advised her to press charges, but she declined. The officer paused. "Between you and me, this guy's behavior patterns indicate stalking. The fixation, the boundary violations, the rationalization that he's protecting her. If your wife won't press charges, you should at least document everything going forward. This type of obsession usually escalates." I thanked him and hung up feeling sick. Caleb had been surveilling our house, photographing my wife, and I'd been sitting at Sunday dinners with him completely unaware. I needed to hear Caleb's side directly. I called him that afternoon and asked to meet for coffee. He agreed immediately, sounding pleased that I wanted to talk. We met at a place downtown, and Caleb showed up looking normal, friendly, like we were just two guys grabbing coffee. "Thanks for reaching out," he said, sitting across from me. "I wanted to clear the air after our conversation at the dinner. I don't think you understood what I was trying to say." I told him I understood perfectly, that he'd told me his connection with Elena went deeper than our marriage, that he considered himself more important to her than her own husband. Caleb didn't deny it. "Yes, exactly. I'm glad you get it. Elena and I have a bond that transcends typical relationships. We're soulmates in the truest sense, not romantic necessarily, but something deeper, spiritual." The way he said it, so earnest and sincere, made my skin crawl. This wasn't a man having a temporary breakdown. This was someone who'd constructed an entire alternate reality. I asked about the night he was found in our backyard. Caleb's expression didn't change. That was a misunderstanding. I sensed Elena was in distress. Our connection allows me to feel when she needs me. I was drawn to your house that night because I knew, on a soul level, that something was wrong. I pointed out that nothing had been wrong, that Elena had been asleep in bed with her husband. "That's what she thought," Caleb said, leaning forward. "But on a deeper level, she was calling out to me. She might not have been conscious of it, but I felt it. That's what people who don't understand our bond don't get. We communicate beyond words." I felt my anger rising, but kept my voice steady. "You were watching our bedroom window with binoculars at 2 a.m. How is that protecting Elena?" Caleb looked at me with something like pity. "You're thinking in conventional terms, linear, limited. What Elena and I share operates outside those constraints. I wasn't watching her in some creepy way. I was maintaining our connection, ensuring her energy was balanced and safe." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording of Elena's 911 call. "I want you to listen to something." Caleb looked curious as I pressed play. Elena's terrified voice filled the space between us, describing the figure in the backyard, the fear she felt, the way her hands were shaking too badly to turn on her phone's flashlight. When she said Caleb's name to the dispatcher, I watched his face. He was smiling. Not a malicious smile, but something almost tender, like he was hearing a love song. The recording continued with Elena describing Caleb's recent behavior to the dispatcher, the constant contact, the inappropriate intensity, the way she'd been trying to distance herself. "He won't accept that I need space," Elena's voice said. "He keeps saying we're connected in a way I can't deny. It's scaring me." When the recording ended, Caleb was still smiling. She was just confused in the moment, scared by the unfamiliar. "But you heard how she talked about our connection, right? She acknowledged it. She knows what we have is real." I stared at him in disbelief. "Caleb, she was terrified. She called the police because you were stalking her through our bedroom window. How are you not hearing that?" He shook his head slowly. "You're misinterpreting her fear. She wasn't scared of me. She was scared of the intensity of our bond, of what it means, of how it challenges conventional relationship structures. That's what people do when they're confronted with something that doesn't fit into neat boxes. They mislabel it as fear. I realized then that nothing I said would penetrate his delusion. Caleb had built an entire framework to rationalize his obsession, and any evidence to the contrary just got reinterpreted to fit his narrative. I need you to stay away from Elena, I said clearly. No more texts, no more visits, no more watching our house. Our friendship is over. Caleb's smile faded. You can't separate us. What Elena and I have transcends your authority as her husband. You're a legal construct. I'm a soul bond. His voice remained calm, which somehow made it more disturbing. I left the coffee shop and called Elena immediately. I told her about the conversation, about how Caleb had completely reframed her 911 call in his mind, about how he'd refused to acknowledge any boundaries. Elena was quiet for a long moment. I need to tell you something else, she said finally. After the police incident, I went through Caleb's social media. He'd created a private Instagram account that he thought I couldn't see, but I found it through a mutual friend's tagged photos. It's all pictures of me, hundreds of them, going back years. Photos he'd taken without my knowledge at parties, at the park, through windows, and captions like, my other half, and soulmate in every lifetime, and waiting for her to remember what we are. My hand tightened on the phone. Elena, this is serious stalking. We need to go to the police and file a formal report. Get a restraining order. She agreed, but her voice was heavy with grief. I'm mourning the friend I thought I had, the person I grew up with, because that person either never existed or is completely gone now. We went to the police station that evening and filed a detailed report. The officer who took our statement was a woman in her 40s who'd clearly handled these situations before. She asked specific questions about the timeline of Caleb's behavior, the escalation pattern, the implicit threats. When Elena mentioned the Instagram account, the officer asked to see it. Elena pulled it up on her phone, and I watched the officer's expression harden as she scrolled through hundreds of photos of my wife, many taken from angles that suggested Caleb had been following her without her knowledge. This is textbook stalking behavior, the officer said. The fixation, the surveillance, the delusion of a special relationship. The fact that he was caught on your property with surveillance equipment and showed no remorse is particularly concerning. These situations can escalate to violence when the stalker feels their fantasy is being threatened. She recommended we file for an emergency protective order immediately. The photos alone are enough evidence, but combined with the trespassing incident and the documented boundary violations, a judge will likely grant it. The protective order hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Elena blocked Caleb's number and all his social media accounts. Within hours, he started calling from different numbers. Elena's phone rang constantly, unknown numbers that she'd answer only to hear Caleb's voice saying he needed to talk to her, needed to explain, needed her to understand that what they had was too important to let others destroy. Elena stopped answering her phone entirely. Then the emails started. Long, rambling messages about soul connections and past lives, and how Elena was denying her true self by pushing him away. You're letting him poison you against me, one email read. He's afraid of what we have because he knows he'll never compare. I've been with you since you were 7 years old. I was there when you learned to ride a bike. I held you when your dad died. I know every version of you that ever existed. He only knows the version you've performed for him. Come back to yourself. Come back to us. Elena showed me the emails with shaking hands. This isn't the person I knew. Or maybe this was always who he was, and I just couldn't see it. The night before the hearing, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept checking the security cameras we'd installed after the backyard incident, watching for movement. Around midnight, she grabbed my arm. There's someone in the driveway. I looked at her phone screen showing the camera feed. A figure stood at the end of our driveway, just standing there, looking at the house. I called 911 while Elena watched the feed. It's Caleb, she whispered. I can tell by the way he's standing. The dispatcher said officers were on their way and asked us to stay inside with the doors locked. We watched on the camera as Caleb slowly walked up our driveway, up our front walkway, and stood at our front door. He didn't knock. He just stood there. Then he pulled out his phone, and Elena's phone started ringing from a blocked number. She answered on speaker. Elena, I know you're awake, Caleb's voice said. I can feel you nearby. Our connection is pulling me here. I need you to come outside so we can talk without him interfering. Elena's voice shook. Caleb, I've called the police. You need to leave now. We have a protective order hearing tomorrow, and you're violating— Caleb interrupted. That hearing is a mistake. You're being manipulated into thinking I'm dangerous when I'm the only person who's ever truly seen you. He doesn't understand what we have. He's scared of it. He's turning you against me because he knows if you remember who we really are to each other, he loses. His voice was calm, rational, like he was explaining basic facts. I'm not leaving until you come talk to me. Just 5 minutes without him. That's all I need. You'll remember once you hear my voice without his interference. Elena looked at me with tears streaming down her face. Caleb, please just go. You're scaring me. There was a long silence. Then Caleb said something that made my blood run cold. You're not scared of me. You're scared of yourself, scared of what you'll feel if you let yourself acknowledge our connection. I'll wait out here until you're ready to be honest." The line went dead. On the camera, we watched him sit down on our front porch, cross-legged, facing the door, and just wait. Police arrived within 10 minutes, their lights painting our house in alternating red and blue. We watched on the camera as 2 officers approached Caleb. He stood up calmly, hands visible, and seemed to be talking to them in a reasonable, friendly manner. One officer went back to his car, while the other stayed with Caleb. 5 minutes later, the officer knocked on our door. I opened it to find him looking grim. "Mr. Reeves, I need to inform you that we're arresting Mr. Caleb Wright for trespassing and stalking. He'll be held overnight and brought to the protective order hearing tomorrow. He's also violated the emergency order by being here." The officer paused. "I want you to know that in my 15 years doing this job, the calm ones worry me more than the angry ones." He showed no recognition that his behavior was wrong. Kept talking about soul connections and destiny. "In my experience, that level of delusion doesn't respond to legal consequences. Please take this seriously." We thanked him and watched through the window as they put Caleb in the patrol car. He was smiling. The protective order hearing the next morning felt surreal. Caleb sat with a public defender who looked like she'd been briefed about his delusions and wasn't happy about it. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who reviewed our evidence with increasing concern. Elena testified first, describing their childhood friendship and how it had transformed over the past year into something obsessive and frightening. She talked about the constant contact, the boundary violations, the night she found him watching their bedroom window, the hundreds of surveillance photos, last night's incident. Her voice broke several times, but she kept going. When the judge asked Elena how Caleb's behavior made her feel, she said, "Like I'm not a real person to him anymore. I'm a character in some fantasy he's created. The real me, with my own thoughts and boundaries and marriage, doesn't exist in his version of reality. He's mourning some imaginary connection while terrorizing the actual human being in front of him." The judge asked if Caleb wanted to speak. He did. Caleb stood and addressed the judge with complete composure. "Your Honor, what Elena described is a fundamental misunderstanding of our relationship. We've been connected since childhood. We share a bond that goes beyond conventional friendship. Yes, I've been present in her life. Yes, I've documented our connection through photography. But these are expressions of a deep, spiritual bond, not stalking." The judge's expression didn't change as Caleb continued. "Elena is going through confusion right now, influenced by someone who feels threatened by our connection. I was outside their house last night because I could sense she needed me. Our bond allows me to feel her distress. I was trying to help her, not frighten her." The public defender put her hand on Caleb's arm, trying to get him to stop talking, but he pulled away gently. "I'm asking you not to sever the most important relationship in Elena's life based on a temporary misunderstanding. What we have transcends legal definitions. It exists on a plane that court orders can't touch." The judge let him finish, then looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Wright, I've heard many justifications for stalking behavior in my time on the bench. Yours is among the most concerning because you genuinely don't recognize your actions as criminal. That makes you dangerous." The judge granted a 5-year protective order with strict terms. Caleb was to have no contact with Elena, direct or indirect. He couldn't come within 500 feet of her, our home, or her workplace. He was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation. Violation of any term would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. As the judge read the terms, Caleb's calm facade finally cracked. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "You're severing a soul bond. You're violating something sacred. Elena, tell her what we have." Elena wouldn't look at him. "Elena," his voice got louder. "Tell them how you feel when we're together. Tell them about our connection. You know I'm right. You know what we are to each other." The public defender was pulling on his arm, trying to get him to sit down, but Caleb was fixated on Elena. "You're making a mistake. You're letting fear control you. In 10 years, you'll regret this. You'll remember who we really are, and you'll hate yourself for denying it." 2 bailiffs moved toward him, and Caleb finally stopped, breathing hard, staring at Elena with such intensity it made me want to shield her from his gaze. "I'll wait," he said quietly. "I'll wait for you to remember. I'll always wait." The months after the protective order were tense. Caleb didn't violate the order directly, but his presence felt omnipresent. He'd post vague things on social media that were clearly about Elena. Sometimes the people we love most misunderstand our intentions. True connections can't be severed by paperwork. Waiting is an act of love. Elena blocked him on all platforms, but mutual friends would screenshot things and send them, worried. One of Elena's co-workers mentioned seeing Caleb in the parking lot across from their office building, just sitting in his car watching the entrance. Elena reported it, but by the time police checked, he was gone. He was walking a fine line, staying technically within the 500-foot boundary while making his presence known. Elena started having panic attacks driving home from work, convinced she'd see his car following her. She'd check the back seat before getting in, scan the street before going inside. The confident, outgoing woman I'd married became hypervigilant and anxious, constantly looking over her shoulder. Elena's therapist explained that this was common with stalking victims. The fear doesn't end with a protective order. If anything, it sometimes gets worse because now you're hyper-aware of the threat. Every car that drives by, every person walking behind you on the street, could be him. Your nervous system is in constant alert mode. The therapist recommended Elena join a support group for stalking victims. Elena resisted at first, not wanting to identify herself that way, but eventually agreed. She came home from the first meeting looking exhausted, but slightly relieved. Everyone there understood, she said. They understood why I check every room when I come home, why I can't relax in restaurants because I need to see all the exits, why I have nightmares about him breaking in. They got it in a way that even you, as supportive as you are, can't fully get because you haven't lived it. I felt a pang of guilt that I hadn't protected her better, hadn't seen the signs earlier, but Elena squeezed my hand. This isn't your fault. Caleb is sick. He's constructed this elaborate delusion, and I was the object he fixated on. That's not something you could have prevented. 6 months after the protective order, Elena's mom called me at work sounding panicked. Caleb showed up at my house. He's been sitting in my driveway for an hour. I told her to call the police immediately and lock her doors. She lived 2 states away, so Caleb had driven over 300 miles to get there. He knocked on my door and said he needed to talk about Elena, her mom said, her voice shaking. He said Elena was in danger, and I needed to help convince her to see him. He said she was being held captive by you, that you'd brainwashed her against him. I told him to leave, and he just went back to his car and sat there. The police in her area removed Caleb but couldn't arrest him because Elena's protective order didn't extend to her mother's property in another state. They gave him a trespass warning for that specific address, but that was all. Elena's mom was terrified. I've known Caleb since he was a little boy. He was always such a sweet kid, so devoted to Elena. What happened to him? Elena explained about the delusion, about how Caleb had rewritten their entire friendship into some cosmic romance. Her mom was quiet for a long time. I encouraged their friendship. When you two started dating, Caleb seemed upset and I told him he'd always be part of Elena's life. Did I contribute to this? Elena assured her mom this wasn't her fault. But after that call, Elena started talking about moving. We need to leave. Go somewhere Caleb doesn't know about. I can't live like this anymore, constantly waiting for him to appear. We started looking at jobs in other states, places Caleb had no connection to. It felt like he'd won, in a way, forcing us to uproot our lives. But Elena's mental health was deteriorating under the constant stress. Then, 8 months after the protective order, something shifted. Caleb stopped posting on social media entirely. The vague messages disappeared. The car wasn't spotted near Elena's work. For 2 weeks, nothing. Elena didn't relax. It feels like the quiet before something worse, she said. Her instincts were right. We got a call from Caleb's ex-wife, a woman named Simone, who Elena had met a few times before their divorce. I need to tell you something, Simone said. Caleb tried to break into my house last night. The police arrested him. He's in custody, and there's a bail hearing tomorrow. I think you should be there. We drove 3 hours to attend the hearing, wanting to ensure the judge understood Caleb's pattern of behavior extended beyond just Elena. At the bail hearing, Simone testified that Caleb had shown up at her house at midnight, trying to get in through a window. When police arrived, Caleb claimed he'd felt Simone was in danger and needed his protection. We've been divorced for 2 years, Simone told the judge. I've had no contact with him during that time by my choice. He became obsessive and delusional during our marriage, fixated on my coworker, convinced they had a special connection. That's why I left. Last night was the first time he's tried to contact me since the divorce was finalized. The prosecutor presented evidence that Caleb had been surveilling Simone's house for weeks, had photos of her daily routines, had written extensive journal entries about protecting her from unnamed threats. The pattern was identical to what he'd done to Elena. The prosecutor argued that Caleb was a danger to multiple women and should be held without bail pending psychiatric evaluation. Caleb's public defender argued he was simply a man struggling with mental illness who needed treatment, not incarceration. The judge reviewed the evidence, including Elena's protective order and the long history of escalating stalking behavior. Mr. Wright, you've demonstrated a pattern of fixating on women, constructing elaborate delusional narratives, and then violating their boundaries under the guise of protection. You've shown no insight into the harm you cause and no willingness to seek help. I'm denying bail and ordering a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. If you're found competent to stand trial, you'll face charges for breaking and entering, stalking, and violation of a restraining order. Caleb was led away, still insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that Simone had needed him, that everyone was misunderstanding his intentions. In the hallway afterward, Simone approached Elena and me. I'm sorry I didn't warn you earlier. When we were married, Caleb became obsessed with a woman from my office. He convinced himself they had this deep connection despite barely knowing her. He'd drive by her house, show up at places she frequented, send her long letters about their soul bond. She got a restraining order, and Caleb spiraled into depression. He'd cry and say she didn't understand him, that society was too closed-minded to accept connections that transcended normal relationships. I thought maybe after our divorce and some time alone, he'd gotten help. I didn't realize he'd transferred the obsession to Elena. She looked at Elena with something like recognition. It's terrifying, isn't it? Being the object of that kind of fixation. knowing that in his mind you're not a real person with autonomy, just a character in his fantasy. Elena nodded, and the two women stood there for a moment in shared understanding of what it meant to be targeted by someone who'd convinced himself his delusion was destiny. The psychiatric evaluation took 3 weeks. The psychologist who conducted it diagnosed Caleb with erotomania, a delusional disorder where the person believes someone is in love with them, usually someone of higher social status or unattainable for some reason. In Mr. Wright's case, his delusions have fixated on multiple women over the years, the psychologist wrote in his report. He constructs elaborate narratives about soul connections and cosmic bonds to rationalize his obsessive behavior. He shows no insight into the delusion and genuinely believes his feelings are reciprocated on some higher plane, even when explicitly told otherwise. He interprets rejection or fear as confusion on the part of the object of his fixation, which allows him to maintain the delusion despite contradictory evidence. He presents a significant danger to any woman he fixates on because he lacks the reality testing to recognize boundaries. The report recommended long-term psychiatric treatment in a secure facility. The judge at the competency hearing read through the evaluation and declared Caleb fit to stand trial, but ordered psychiatric treatment as a condition of any potential sentence. You need help, Mr. Wright, whether you believe it or not. Caleb's trial for breaking and entering Simone's house was scheduled for 6 months later. During that time, he remained in custody because no one would post bail after the psychiatric evaluation became public. Elena and I tried to return to normal life, but normal felt like a foreign concept. Elena still checked locks multiple times before bed, still scanned parking lots before getting out of her car, still had nightmares where Caleb was standing in our bedroom watching her sleep. Her therapist said it would take years to fully process the trauma of being stalked by someone she'd trusted since childhood. It's not just the fear of what he did, the therapist explained to me during a joint session. It's the betrayal. Elena has to grieve the friend she thought she had while simultaneously dealing with the reality of the predator he actually was. Those two processes happening simultaneously create complex trauma that doesn't resolve quickly or easily. I watched my wife struggle through panic attacks and hypervigilance and felt helpless to fix it. All I could do was be present, be patient, and remind her that she was safe now. The trial lasted 4 days. Simone testified about the break-in attempt. The photos and journals were entered into evidence. The prosecutor brought in the psychologist who'd evaluated Caleb to explain erotomania to the jury. Elena was called as a witness to establish the pattern of behavior. She testified about their childhood friendship and how it had twisted into something unrecognizable, about finding him in the bushes with binoculars, about the surveillance photos and obsessive messages, about the fear that had governed her life for over a year. When the defense attorney tried to suggest Elena had encouraged Caleb's attention by maintaining their friendship, she looked him directly in the eye and said, "I was friends with him from age 7. For 18 years, he was my friend. Then something broke in him, or maybe it was always broken and I just didn't see it. But I didn't encourage stalking by being someone's friend. I didn't deserve to be surveilled and terrorized because I valued someone I'd known my entire life. Don't put this on me." The jury deliberated for 3 hours before finding Caleb guilty on all charges. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. At sentencing, the prosecutor asked for the maximum term, citing Caleb's complete lack of remorse and the likelihood he'd reoffend. Caleb's attorney argued for leniency and psychiatric treatment instead of prison time. The judge asked Caleb if he had anything to say. Caleb stood and addressed the court in that same calm, rational tone he'd used throughout. "I understand that my actions have been misinterpreted as threatening. I understand that legally I violated boundaries. But I want the court to know that everything I did came from a place of genuine connection and concern. I don't expect you to understand the depth of what Elena and I shared, because it operated on a level most people never experience. I hope that one day, when she's no longer being influenced by fear and misunderstanding, she'll remember what we were to each other. Until then, I accept the court's judgment." The judge looked at him with something between pity and disgust. "Mr. Wright, the fact that you still describe your stalking as a genuine connection demonstrates you haven't grasped the severity of what you've done. You terrorized 2 women, violated their privacy and safety, and constructed elaborate delusions to justify it. You need intensive psychiatric treatment, but you also need to be separated from society where you can't harm anyone else." The judge sentenced Caleb to 5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of supervised probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment. He was also ordered to have no contact with Elena or Simone for the rest of his life, a permanent restraining order that would extend beyond his release. As bailiffs led Caleb out of the courtroom, he turned back one final time and looked at Elena. She met his gaze steadily, no longer looking away or shrinking from his intensity. Whatever power his delusion had held over her was gone. She'd seen him for what he truly was, and the childhood friend she'd mourned was revealed as having never existed at all. Caleb was escorted out, and Elena took a deep breath, the first full breath I'd seen her take in over a year. In the hallway, Simone hugged Elena, and they exchanged numbers, bonded by their shared experience of being targeted by the same predator. "We survived him," Simone said. "That's what matters. He doesn't get to define our stories anymore." 3 years later, Elena and I had moved across the country to Oregon, far from any connection to Caleb. Elena had found a new therapist who specialized in complex trauma and was slowly rebuilding her sense of safety in the world. She'd even reconnected with a few childhood friends who'd known both her and Caleb, and they'd validated that Caleb had always been intense and possessive, even as a child. He'd get upset if Elena played with other kids, one friend told us. He'd monopolize her time at parties. We all thought he just really valued the friendship. But looking back, the signs were there. He just hid it better when we were young. Elena was learning not to blame herself for missing the signs, for valuing loyalty to an old friend over her own instincts that something was wrong. Her therapist kept reminding her that predators are skilled at manipulation, at making their targets feel responsible for the abuse, that recognizing and escaping the situation was what mattered, not how long it took to recognize it. Caleb served 4 years of his 5-year sentence before being released on parole. Elena got a notification through the victim services system. She'd moved, changed her number, scrubbed her social media, but the notification still sent her into a panic attack. "He's out there again," she said, her voice tight with fear. "He could find me." I reminded her that the restraining order was permanent, that Caleb's parole officer would be monitoring him, that we'd built a life he knew nothing about in a place he had no connection to. But I understood her fear. Delusions don't disappear with prison time. If anything, they might have intensified during 4 years of isolation with nothing but his own thoughts. Elena's therapist helped her develop a safety plan, including changing our locks again, installing new security cameras, and checking in regularly with local police, so they'd have our situation on file if anything happened. Elena hated living this way, constantly looking over her shoulder, but her therapist reminded her that hypervigilance after trauma was normal and would gradually decrease as time passed without incident. A year after Caleb's release, Elena got a message through a mutual acquaintance who didn't know about the restraining order. "Caleb asked me to tell you he's gotten help and wants to apologize." Elena showed me the message, her hands shaking. "He's already violating the order by trying to contact me indirectly." We reported it to his parole officer, who confirmed Caleb had been attending mandatory therapy sessions, but showed minimal progress in acknowledging the delusional nature of his past behavior. "He participates in treatment," the parole officer said, "but he frames everything as having been a misunderstanding rather than acknowledging he stalked multiple women. That's concerning from a reoffending standpoint." The parole officer warned Caleb that any further attempts to contact Elena, even through third parties, would violate his parole and send him back to prison. For now, that seemed to be enough to stop him. But Elena and I both knew the delusion hadn't died. It had just gone underground, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. We built a good life anyway. Elena found work she loved, made new friends who knew nothing about Caleb, went weeks sometimes without thinking about him. But then something would trigger the memories. A man standing too close behind her in line at the grocery store, headlights in the driveway that lingered too long, a social media friend request from someone with no profile picture. Each time, Elena would spiral briefly back into the fear before grounding herself in the present, reminding herself she was safe, that Caleb was hundreds of miles away under supervision, that she'd survived the worst of it and come out stronger. Her therapist celebrated these moments of resilience, pointing out that Elena was reclaiming her life piece by piece from the trauma Caleb had inflicted. Some days Elena believed it. Other days she wondered if she'd ever stop waiting for him to appear, to shatter the fragile safety she'd built. But either way, she kept moving forward, kept building a life worth living, kept refusing to let Caleb's delusion define her story. 5 years after Caleb's release, Elena got a final notification. Caleb had died in a car accident, instantly, no other vehicles involved. He'd driven off a mountain road in Colorado during a snowstorm. The parole officer called to inform us officially and to let us know the permanent restraining order was now moot. Elena sat with the news for a long time, processing feelings she couldn't quite name. Relief, certainly, that the threat was permanently gone, but also a strange sadness for the friend she'd once had, or thought she'd had, before the delusion consumed him. That night, Elena burned all the old photos she'd kept of her and Caleb as children, the evidence of a friendship that had never been as innocent as she'd believed. "I need to let go of the version of him I thought existed," she told me, watching the photos curl and blacken in our fireplace. "That person was never real, or he stopped being real so long ago that it doesn't matter. I'm free now. Actually, finally free. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story."